I went to the Ripley Aquarium today. You guys been to there here in Toronto? My wife and I go to lots of aquariums, and we enjoy them. And it prompted a lot of questions that I thought might get us to talk a little bit more about evolution, about the public understanding of evolution, and what the roadblocks to that understanding might be, if that's...
Great. I'm glad you say aquariums, not aquaria, by the way, here. We're speaking English, not Latin here.
Oh, see, and I could steal a joke from Judah Friedlander right now, but I won't, about English. I keep missing my thing. So we were at the Ripley Aquariums, and we, of course, saw many wonderful animals there. And if that, for my wife and I, prompts a discussion about what we used to believe, or whether or not, because I can't recall if I always accepted. I know I was taught about evolution in school, but I can't recall if I always accepted it. It seemed to always be colored with this idea that there was a God in there monkeying around somewhere. Is there any realistic probability that any thinking agent could have been monkeying around in the process based on what we know at this point?
No. I have to be careful here because I was once being interviewed on television by a dreadful man whose name has mercifully escaped me. And I didn't realize that he was a sort of plant for intelligent design. And he asked me whether I could think of any what's the best scenario I could think of for life on this planet being intelligently designed. And so I thought, well, I'll give him the best shot, which is directed panspermia, the idea that Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel put out, which was that some alien civilization in a distant planet wanted to preserve their form of life. Perhaps they were going extinct or something of that sort. So they put bacteria of their form of life in the nose cone of a spaceship and sent it off into space, and it landed here and started life here. Now, I said, of course, I don't for a moment believe that, but you've asked me what's the best possibility for life to be designed in this by an alien. And he said, wait a minute. Richard Dawkins believes in little green men. And this has dogged me ever since. And I regularly get on Twitter, this is the guy who believes in aliens seeding life on this planet and so on.
This is something we've spoken about before, where it seems that there are some people who are going to either intentionally misunderstand and misrepresent what you've said, what anybody said, or they are so horribly confused that they don't seem to understand the basics of the English language. Now, I know that many of them are from the United States, and we've kind of butchered the English language. But as I walked around the aquariums today, and I made that note too, that there were multiples, my wife mentioned something to me that you see just at the aquariums a broad diversity of life. And I can understand how someone who hasn't been trained and taught about natural selection and the process and the length of time involved could look at this and just say, I give up. I don't understand. It has to be magic. Somebody has to have done it. We should be teaching this. I know there are schools in the United States that don't, even though they're supposed to. Apart from just saying this needs to be the curriculum, what can we as a community do to encourage the sort of teaching and training on evolutionary theory that we need?
I think I give up is actually quite a respectable response, because it is astounding how complicated life is and how beautiful it is, how diverse it is, and how it looks designed. And so I could well imagine people saying, I give up. However, to say it must have been created, I mean, that's just illogical, because it's no more easy to explain the origin of a creator than it is to explain the origin of the complexity of life itself. It's a total and complete non-explanation. So before Darwin came along, it would have been perfectly respectable to say, I give up. it's incredibly complicated. There must be an explanation, but I can't think of it. And then Darwin came along and did think of it. But to say, therefore, it must have been designed is a total and complete cop-out. It doesn't explain anything.
It's actually contradictory. If you say, I give up, it must have been designed, then you haven't given up.
Yeah.
You've offered an explanation.
Exactly.
And you don't even care if it's true.
Exactly. So you asked me, what can we do to teach it? Well, you can write lots of books, as I've done. But then, of course, they've got to read them, and which is more of a problem. You can do television, I suppose. I've done a bit of that as well. It is very difficult to get across. I mean, one of the problems is the sheer time involved. Nobody can grasp the immensity of time that geology allows, in which evolution has happened. It is absolutely colossal. And so all our intuitions about the rate at which evolution might go let us down. We can't really understand how you could go from one species to another, let alone from a microbe to mammalian life. So getting across the sheer time scale is one thing. And there are various analogies, you're probably familiar with them, lots of them. One that I rather like is the one where you stretch your arm out. I didn't invent this, somebody else did. And you say the middle of your throat, the middle of my tie here, is the origin of life. And the tip of my finger is the present. And the time involved, you've got, the dinosaurs didn't come until about there. So way near the present. The Homo sapiens arrived at about my fingernail there. And the whole of human history, the whole of recorded history, the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Jews and the Greeks and the Romans, and all of human recorded history flies away in the dust from one stroke of the nail file. So we're accustomed to thinking of human history as long. We think in the mists of time, back to the ancient Greeks, back to the ancient Egyptians. We think so long ago. It's nothing. It's just, as somebody else said, it's just before the stroke of midnight on the clock face of the geological time.
Yeah, there's a couple difficulties there. Not only our inability to properly grasp the timescales, but also our ego and our sense of self-importance, and how it seems strange that everything we know about humans could vanish in that analogous stroke of a nail. I mean,
another analogy, I think, I can't remember, it might have been Mark Twain who suggested the layer of paint on top of the Eiffel Tower. That's humanity. But the timescale involved is one thing. Another point you have to get across is that it is not chance. There are an awful lot of people who think they can simply dismiss evolution because it's the theory of chance. Well, any fool can see it can't possibly be a theory of chance. I mean, chance couldn't possibly give rise to the beauty, the elegance, the sheer designedness, the apparent designedness of living things. It cannot be that. The whole enterprise is to get away from random chance and to substitute something else. And Darwinian natural selection is the only substitute that has ever been proposed that could work.
The idea that there maybe there's chance involved in when and how a mutation occurs, or there may be chance involved in which weather storm might separate someone. But in the broad scheme, this is physical law acting on matter, following, not prescribed by an intelligence, but following the natural order.
Yes, there has to be chance, of course, in mutation and the weather and things like that. But the driving force towards the illusion of design, the beauty of the design of an eye or a wing or a foot or a heart, and the diversity of life, the driving force is non-random natural selection.
Now, I always wanted to ask you, there are people who grasp things more clearly at different ages. And I know young kids who are thrilled to learn good science and are fascinated with dinosaurs. And Darwinian natural selection just makes sense to them. It's like the first time you hear it, it's, well, of course that's the case. For others, it seems to be a little more difficult. either based on their upbringing, I don't know what all the factors might be. But when you see a fish that is demonstrating amphibian-like qualities, it's coming up onto land and it has flippers that are close to fin, there are people, or close to feet, there are people who would look at that and say, wow, I get it, I get how this...
Yeah.
And there are others, like one of my wife's relatives, looked at an example of that. One of my relatives would do this too, so I'm not just beating up on her family. But she looked at this and she said, isn't it wonderful what God can create?
Yeah. Those fish are lovely because they're doing much more recently. They've re-evolved what our ancient ancestors did in the Devonian era. And so they come out of the water, they walk around, they jump, they even climb trees. It's wonderful to see these fish. They have various names like frogfish and things like that.
But I always just presume that you, as a young boy, just immediately got this.
No, I didn't. I think it was my father who first explained natural selection to me, and I understood it, but I didn't think it was a big enough theory to account for the elegance of life. It was only later that I apprehended that.
And it's going to be a different answer for everybody, but do you know what it was that made the change in you from, okay, that's interesting, I don't quite get it, to, oh my gosh, this is a profound statement that people aren't grasping?
I don't remember that, but it is a profound statement, and it has to be in a way because it took so long for humanity to get it. I mean, it took till the middle of the 19th century, and I've always been baffled by why, in a way, people like Newton and Hume and Aristotle didn't get it, because it is actually a very simple idea. It's not like relativity or quantum theory. It's not profoundly difficult, but it's, I suppose, profoundly counterintuitive. I think, as you've suggested, Matt, it's kind of... you almost can't believe that something so complicated and beautiful as life could possibly come into being by such a simple idea as the non-random survival of random variation. So I think that may be why it took until the middle of the 19th century for Darwin and Wallace independently to get it. And I expect they had resistance to it when they first thought of it.
And how fortunate are we that it's become sufficiently understood that now school children can, grasp this and have a good understanding of it. I think one of the reasons it seems so strange to me, I agree with you, that it seems like someone should have thought of this earlier, because we had domesticated animals, we domesticated crops,
yes.
We had been doing the things that nature does.
Exactly, and this was one of the main points Darwin made. Darwin used domesticated animals as his sort of introductory argument. He said, look at how powerful selection is, look at how we've managed to change rock doves into all the various breeds of pigeons, look how we managed to change flowers, wild roses into domestic roses. Wolves have become dogs of all these different breeds that are totally unlike wolves, and yet they've been transformed from the wolf in just a matter of centuries. So what Darwin did was say, look what can be done by artificial selection. Now all you need do is that mental flip that says, you don't need a breeder, you don't need a human breeder to come along and choose the dogs to breed from. Nature will do that for you. So the power of artificial selection is harnessed in a slightly different way by nature, and nature is the breeder that produces all of life.
There's a confusing array of creationist models. There are the people who think that the world was created in 7 literal days and that these represent ages. I can understand the people who, I don't understand why they think the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old now. That's an untenable position. But if that's what they believe, I can understand why understanding evolution would be more difficult for them, because they don't even accept that that time is there. But I'm more baffled by the apologists and creationists who think, oh, of course, the universe is 13.7 billion years old, the Earth's 4.5 billion, but that's still not enough time when we have the evidence.
Yeah, there are people like that. There was a nice story told by J.B.S. Haldane, the great British geneticist, one of the founders of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. And after a lecture, a lady stood up and asked him a question and put exactly this point. She said, Professor Haldane, I simply can't believe that there's been enough time, even given billions of years, to go from a single-celled ancestor to something like me, a multicellular creature, trillions of cells with the heart and lungs and brain and kidneys and bones and things. Just doesn't make sense. Madam, you did it yourself, and it only took you 9 months. To which, of course, she could have retorted, yes, but that in that 9 months the process was supervised by DNA, or she would have called it genes in those days. And that, of course, is correct. And what evolution does, what natural selection does, is to choose those genes that supervise the embryological process that does that amazing trick in 9 months.
So in this process, one of the key aspects that we come up against is transitional forms, and people have different views of what that means. So a creationist might say, oh, you haven't found any transitional forms, or you haven't found a missing link. And for years, when I'm asked this question on the show, well, first of all, I point out that, that you're calling into the atheist experience, and I'm not a biologist, and if you maybe you're talking to the wrong guy about this. But I had always responded that everything is a transitional form, that all of us are a transition between our ancestors and our progeny. And this, I don't know that this has the impact on others that it had on me, because they seem to be looking at it backwards. Backwards, it's a little easier to say, oh, this is clearly a transition.
Yes, I mean, everything is potentially a transition. Not everything actually is, but potentially it is. Michael Shermer makes rather a nice point, which is that when there's a gap in the fossil record, which there is in quite a number of places, because fossilizing is quite a rare event, so that we have this gap, and they say, there's a gap. And then somebody finds a fossil right in the middle of the gap, which is a transitional form. Now we've got 2 gaps.
And then they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and so on. It's interesting to me that so much emphasis, I think, as people were battling against this idea in the modern era, because we're trying to teach it in schools, and of course there are religious people objecting, this idea of a missing link kept coming up.
Well, the missing link was in Victorian times, that meant the missing link between apes and humans, and there were no fossils, no hominid fossils in Darwin's time. Darwin looked at the modern anatomy of chimpanzees and gorillas and correctly inferred that we are African apes, that we evolved in Africa. And since that time, of course, there have been lots and lots of fossils discovered in South Africa, in East Africa, and even North Africa. So we have lots and lots of links. They're not missing anymore. They're missing on the chimpanzee's side of the divide, because you have a common ancestor which lived about 6 million years ago, and then it branched and went down one side towards chimpanzees and bonobos, which branched again there, and then the other side went down to humans. And we've got plenty of fossils down the human line, so there's no dearth of links there. They're no longer missing. There aren't any fossils down the chimpanzee line, and that's regrettable. It may be because they're forest dwellers and it's more difficult to fossilize in forest conditions. But there are plenty of missing links, no longer missing.
But you can't know, you weren't there.
Yeah. Yes. How do you deal with that kind of thing? Yes, of course. And one analogy that I like to use to that is to say a detective comes upon the scene of a crime after it's been committed, more or less by definition, and works out what happened. Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, they look at fingerprints, they look at footprints, they look at all the cues that are available around, there's a window open or the window closed or whatever it might be, and you work out what happened by looking at the clues. That's sort of what we do. But the difference is, whereas Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot had a limited number of clues, we have millions and millions and millions of clues. We have fossils, we have the geographical distribution of animals and plants on islands and continents of the world. They're distributed in exactly the places they should be distributed if evolution had taken place. We look at fossils, we look at molecular, comparative molecular sequencing. You can sequence the DNA or the proteins of any creature you like, animal or plant, and you can find genes that are clearly the same gene, but with differences in the details. And so you can literally count the number of discrepancies between a human and a possum, or a human and a beetle. It doesn't matter what it is. You can find a gene where it's obviously the same gene, and you can literally count the number of letter discrepancies between them. And you plot it all out, and you find a beautiful hierarchical tree, a beautiful pedigree. It's got to be a pedigree. And so that's what you can do with molecular data. That's sort of what Darwin himself was able to do with bones and comparative anatomy. And that's persuasive enough, goodness knows. But with molecules, it's even more persuasive. So you don't have to have been there. I mean, the evidence is just mountainously high.
I think this ties back a lot into different views of knowledge, where when it's convenient, they would like there to be certainty. And I'm always happy to point out that they believe in Jesus, and they weren't there when he was crucified as well. So clearly, we can infer some things and come to reasonable conclusions. When we talk about science, it's a couple of the beautiful things about science is that it's self-correcting. And yet, the creationists will just constantly point to, oh, here's an anomaly, here's an error, here's a mistake, here's a hoax, as if they could disprove evolution and all of a sudden their creation model wins. And to me, it was, even if we found out tomorrow that everything we understood about natural selection were wrong, that still wouldn't lend any credence to it.
That's right. No, I mean, you have two hypotheses, A and B, and A has a lot going for it, and B has nothing whatever going for it. So, and then you find a single slight discrepancy. Something went wrong with A, as you say, a hoax, Piltdown man, whatever it is. Right, that's it for A. Must be B. And that's the level of logic we have to deal with.
Oh, you have an alibi. Oh, the butler did it then. Yes, we're done.
Exactly, yes, exactly.
So one of the aspects of this is that we have a model that is testable and a model that makes predictions. For example, we predicted, based on all of our understanding, where to go dig in order to find something like Tiktaalik. What, and this is, you can feel free to make a face and scoff because it's what I did when I thought of the question. What would creationists have to do, potentially, to turn their proposition into a testable claim at all?
I cannot think of what they could do, unfortunately. It would be nice if can you think of anything? I mean,
no, that's...
Yeah.
I'm asking you.
I mean, they can up the ante on finding difficulties for evolution. I mean, Darwin wrote a chapter in The Origin of Species called Organs of Extreme Complexity, and he took things like the eye and the heart, and he showed how, although on the face of it, it seems almost too difficult to explain, nevertheless you can explain it. You don't actually need to. I mean, if somebody comes to me and says, I bet you can't explain the elbow joint of the lesser spotted weasel frog. And I'd say, well, actually, I've never heard of the lesser spotted weasel frog, and so I can't explain it. Right, that's it. You can't explain it. God must have done it. The proper answer is no, I don't know how to explain that, but let's do a bit of research on it. Let's go to work on it. Let's examine. Let's go and find some weasel frogs and examine them and dissect them and see how they behave, and we'll see if we can do it. But even if we fail, that doesn't mean that the alternative theory B is the right one. It could be that we just aren't clever enough to think of the alternative. I've satirized the argument as the argument from personal incredulity. You say, I can't understand how this could have happened, therefore God must have done it. But that's the negative thing. That's trying to find flaws in evolution. You've asked me, what testable hypothesis could they put forward? What experiment could they do, say? I used to think that something like God coming down out of the clouds and bellowing in a great, loud Paul Robeson voice, "I created everything." That would be moderately convincing, but I still... I still would actually fall back on Hume on miracles and say, isn't it actually more probable that I'm hallucinating or being hoaxed by some clever conjurer like that? Perhaps an alien conjurer from outer space.
Yeah. This is, technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. How the hell can I tell the difference? And this is why I changed the answer I gave about what would change my mind to I have no idea.
Yes, quite.
But if there is a God, he knows, and he hasn't done it, so the hell with him. But the God voice, maybe if he just said, "I created the platypus," because that's a confusing creature for many people.
Well, when the first platypus was sent to London for examination, it was thought to be a hoax. It was thought to be somebody stitched together a duck's bill and a
P.T. Barnum created the platypus right after the Fiji mermaid.
Yeah.
I'm going to shift topics just a little bit because we talked before about the world we're living in, about the information that people get and how it is almost being curated for them by social media, that you get spoon-fed things. But I want to touch on a different aspect of this, and that is reaching conclusions based on headlines only.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen what... Not only do we live in a world where headlines are already sensationalized to draw your attention, but I find over and over again, people will read the headline and not the article, not the content, certainly not any references, and just broadcast on social media.
They do, that's right, and I think this is one of the reasons why science has a problem, a public relations problem, because so often a headline will appear in a tabloid newspaper which will say something like, "X causes cancer, scientists show." And then next week, the same X cures cancer, scientists show. And so the headlines obviously contradict each other, but the details may not. It could be that X both causes and cures cancer. Maybe it has a U-shaped dose-response curve, so that if you're plotting the effect of the amount of X there and the effect on cancer there, there's a U-shaped curve, and if you're on that part of the U, it has a positive effect on cancer. That part of the curve, it has a negative effect, and so it does both cause and cure. The contradictory headlines, though, will lead people to say, "Oh, well, scientists just contradict themselves, so we can't believe science anymore." And that's very sad. And I think that, obviously, journalists bear some blame for that, but also scientists who not publish, but announce their results prematurely and in a sort of half-baked way, so that it's almost meat and drink to journalists wishing to pick up the story. So I think that is a serious problem, and scientists need to think about how to handle that.
I think there's so much concern that people don't value science and people aren't sufficiently science educated that some scientists are like, "Oh, we need to get this out here and let's do it in a way that's exciting." So I've seen headlines that science has proved that we are living in a simulation, and then recently that we are not living in a simulation. And if you actually dig in on what the papers say, they say neither of those. Just this week, even a day or so ago, getting outside the realm of science, I saw a headline that was, "Pope allows debates on married priests." And people read the headline and their immediate assumption is, oh, the Catholic Church, maybe they're coming around and they're going to allow priests to marry. And that has absolutely nothing to do with what was being discussed. This has happened several times before, that the Episcopalian priests who were married, the Catholic Church would like to lure them in to be priests and allow them to stay married. They just can't have sex anymore.
Not with women anyway.
Yeah, depending on how long you've been married, maybe it's not a problem. I don't know. But this is a marketing strategy. This is, hey, the Catholic Church is losing out to Protestants in the Amazon region. We're not really going to change Catholicism, but we'll change parts of Catholicism in the Amazon region just so that we can reach more people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But they're not coming around. They're not coming around on sex at all.
No. So the headline is misleading. Quite right. Yes.
I wish they would come around on sex.
Yes.
That's not just funny. I find it bizarre that this one particular church has perhaps more sexual hang-ups than any other. You know, they're going to prohibit the very thing that one would argue perhaps makes us human, the desires that we have, the interaction, the stuff that has produced who we are. Nope, can't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
While they hide rapists.
Yeah.
I think they have a duty to do better, but